Invoice settings are automatically loaded when a project is created based on the project type. To change the default invoice settings on a particular project type, go to the Defaults tab in the Preferences menu and follow the help in that screen. Use the account name to move this invoice group to a different account. The invoice group name should be the same as the project name, unless the invoice group relates to multiple projects. To understand how to invoice multiple projects on one invoice, go to the Invoice Balances list in the Debtors tab and follow the help to the right of the word Group by clicking on the movie icon. The invoice start date is the date the next invoice should start. Note that if there are any uninvoiced charges prior to this date, these charges will also appear on this invoice. Here you can indicate the frequency with which the invoice will run. For example, Advance 1 every 1 month will run one invoice once a month in advance. Arrears 2 every 1 month will run twice a month in arrears. In the case of a project which does not have a recurring invoice period, this should be marked as Advance 1 every 1 day. The invoice start date and end date will control the invoice period. In the Invoice Day field, you can enter the day you wish the invoice to end. For example, for invoices to run until the 25th of each month, use 25. And for invoices to run to the end of the month, use 32. If you are just running 1 month, irrespective of the start or end date, leave this field blank. For example, a project which starts on the 14th of January will run to the 13th of February. In the minimum invoice period, you can enter a minimum invoice period that the invoice should run. For example, if you have a project starting on the 20th of February and you wish to invoice this customer until the 25th of the month, but you want the invoice to run for a minimum of 2 weeks, if you enter 2 weeks in the minimum period, the invoice will run from the 20th of February to the 25th of March. Because the 20th of February to the 25th of February is less than the 2-week minimum period. In the invoice end date, you can enter an invoice end date where the invoice period is not recurring and is for fixed dates. For example, the 25th of March to the 29th of March once off. If the project is recurring and the initial invoice period is different to the repeat invoice period, you can also enter an invoice end date for the initial invoice period only by clicking on the box Initial Period Only. That means the first invoice will run for 4 weeks, and then thereafter the invoices will run monthly. The Show Details setting indicates whether the individual invoice line items will be shown when printing the invoice. If the box is unchecked, only the invoice total will be displayed without the individual invoice line items. Here you can indicate the service authorization settings. Select All to authorize all services when they are created. Select On Deposit to authorize all services on the payment of a particular percentage deposit. Select On Payment to authorize services when the invoice is paid. And select On Payment All Except Last to authorize all services except the last service when the invoice is paid. Lastly, you can select On Order to authorize all services before the end of the most recent order expiry date. Orders can be added in the project details screen. For further help, you can click on the question mark at any time to get the help for a specific field.